Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Writers Call, the Writers Hour, where we have a call for Good Men Project writers every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific. And we're really excited about the community of writers we have at the Good Men Project. Over the past 8 years, we've had over 6,000 different writers write for us, and really the diversity and the insights and the thinking and the passion that people bring to this group is really extraordinary. So thanks and welcome. So the thing I want to talk about today is I heard an interview with Emma Thompson, who is a British actress. She's also a writer. I just happen to be, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and how-to videos and things on writing craft, and I just happened to stumble upon this. And what she suggested that writers do is to examine their relationship with words. And at first I thought that was just kind of a throwaway, oh yeah, examine your relationship with words. Like, why would you want to do that? But then she explained how with her relationship with her parents, who really emphasized words with her, and how she learned that words were used as a form of empowerment, right? So her parents specifically used words to empower her to do whatever she wanted to do. And so that was the way she learned to use words, to empower other people. For her, they were an empowerment tool. And so whether that was, the way she was brought up or that was the way she used them that way in her acting, she used that way in her writing. She did stand-up comedy where she used words that way. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. What was my relationship with words like? And for me, words were a form of escape. So when I was little, I was scared to death of real people. I literally couldn't talk to people. And so I would hide in books. And those books would transport me to new worlds. When I was young, I read a book a day for a while. There were whole years where I would read a book a day. Maybe it would take me 2 days, but I was prolific at reading, and it was because they were that escape. They were brought me to these new worlds. And so now when I write, that's how I write. I try to transcend the world where people find themselves in now and bring them into another vision of a world that might be bigger or grander or just more real than the world they are in now. Some people's relationship with words are that words are always very emotional, right? So think about the people who tend to write rants, right? When somebody is angry when they are writing a rant. Or somebody just is always super passionate about something. But for some people, it really is the emotion is the thing. The goal of their writing is to be emotional. That's how they write. Whereas on the other hand, some people are extremely logical. And we talked about this last week a little when we said, look at different styles of writing to figure out what might help your own writing, right? So I gave the example of read instruction manuals because those are always really clear step-by-step directions, and it'll help your work become more clear. But some people already start out as they want to be really logical. They want to be really clear. They want everything to be very objective. They don't believe in metaphors or similes, or they just want things as specific and logical and orderly as possible. Words to them are used to explain things. Related to that are words where people like to teach. But there's a little bit of a difference, to me at least, between explaining something in a very logical way and teaching something. So teaching something has that, yes, I'm going to give someone information in a way that is logical and makes sense, but I'm going to add things to make that come alive. I'm going to add in examples. I'm going to add in metaphors. I'm going to add in stories. I'm going to figure out creative ways of making something that could otherwise be just very logical and dry, and I'm going to make that come alive as a teacher. So that's another way that people have a relationship with words, right? They use them to teach people. For some people, words might simply be a way to get what they want, right? Words, they want to convince people, they want to manipulate people, they want to just get what they want through words. For some people, words are associated with work and business. So the sole goal of words is to earn more money. So everything they write is something designed to sell someone something, or designed to somehow get people to spend money so that that person can make more money. And the final example I'm going to give is sometimes it might be that you just love sentences, like you love the construction of words. You love the way words work. You think about, when you write something, you think about it as a puzzle. Like, is that word really the best word I could use, or could I use something else? Can I change the order of my sentences? Can I change the way the paragraphs work? Can I just play with the words in order to get something that nobody has ever read before? So all of the examples I gave are different ways that people can have relationships with words. So how does thinking about your relationship get you to become a better writer, right? Like, how can I make this information, which I find fascinating, but how can I make this useful to you as a writer? Well, the first thing is to think about your own relationship with the words and how that relationship creates the kind of writing that you currently do. And then think about how else you might want to have a relationship with words that's different and how that might change. Or it might be taking something that you love about words, taking your existing relationship, and just making it a little bit better. So, for example, let's use emotion as an example. Say you're this type of writer that's really emotional, right? Say you love nothing better than to write a rant, an angry rant. Well, what if you thought about how to make an emotional arc over the story so that the emotions your reader goes through actually changes over the course of the article or story or whatever blog post you're writing? So what if you started a post without any emotion, where you're just doing a description about the way the world is now? You're just setting the stage for someone, telling them about something where there isn't really any emotion. And then you build up to that rant, and by the end of it, you're just as angry and passionate as ever. But you don't end on that anger. You end on, hey, this is what we can do together. This is something hopeful. This is how things could change. This is how we could be more optimistic together. This is the world I envision. So now all of a sudden you've taken an angry rant, and there's nothing wrong with an angry rant, but you've made it into something deeper, something that people can go on a journey with you, an emotional journey with you on, instead of just saying, oh, yes, that's one angry person there. So think about how you can take your reader on a journey using the relationship that you have with words. So what if maybe you have the opposite problem, right? Maybe your posts or your stories or your articles aren't emotional enough. Maybe you're feeling that they're really dry and they don't really get people excited. So how can you put more emotion into it? Well, the way you can't put emotion more into it is to just logically say to yourself, okay, I'm gonna put a little more emotion into this because I know that I tend to be really logical. Like that usually doesn't work. Your mind can't solve problems in the same way that they create problems. I butchered Einstein's quote there. There's a really good quote by Einstein about that. But the thought is, if you're a really logical person, it's really hard to just say, okay, I'm gonna write now. I feel angry in here to put more emotion into this. It's hard to do that logically. But what if you waited until you actually did get emotional about something and then wrote it down very quickly so you knew what that looked like when you were emotional? Or what if you did just something simple like going for a run right before you wrote something, like being really physically active so you literally got your blood coursing through your brains? What if you took something that was very dry and tried to read it out loud in a really emotional tone of voice and then edited while you read it out loud? So there's a bunch of different tools you can use to adjust your writing to be better than it was. So you examine your relationship first, and then you say, okay, what could I use to make it better? And then you use tools to make that change, to make that turn. I took a screenwriting class over the weekend because I've been trying to write screenplays, which is a whole new thing for me, and it's way more structured than the type of writing I usually do. But it was interesting because there were some people in class, like there was this one girl who talked really fast and said a whole bunch of information whenever she talked. And she would talk really fast and say a whole bunch of things. You're like, wow, that girl's brilliant. But what did she just say? Because she said so much. And then when she was asked to do a synopsis of her story, it was the same thing. She talked really fast. She put a whole bunch of information. And you're like, that story sounds fascinating, but I don't know what you just said. And then you had other people who were really quiet and would barely talk. And then when they did a synopsis of their story, it was like one short sentence. It'd be like, and what else? Where else does this go? So it was just interesting that the way that people spoke mirrored the way that they wrote. And so another tool that you can use is to look at the way you speak, like observe yourself in situations where you talk, and figure out what works or what doesn't work about the way you talk, and then you can do this exercise both ways. You can look at how you talk and try to use it to make your writing better, or you can look at how you write and use it to make your talking better. So being aware of the way that you talk, the way that you write, and linking those two together is another good tool in terms of how to develop your craft and make your writing better and stronger. So that's my tip for the day. I'm going to open it up to a question and answer. It looks like we've lost someone already, so there may just be one person here. But questions, and it doesn't have to be about what I just talked about. It could be about anything.
Yeah, well, Lisa, this is JR, and I guess my question is, what happens when you've got both the logical and the emotional?
So that's good. I mean, that's a great thing to have.
Because my brain looks at things, I mean, I have no choice but for my brain to look at things very logically, but I'm also a very emotional person and write with emotion and write my emotions.
So I think that's like the ideal combination, right? Where you can do both, because what you want to think about. Okay, so in your case, then what you want to think about is write something, and then pretend you are not you. Pretend you are the other person reading it, and see if you get both those logical connections that you're trying to make, and if you're getting an emotional journey that will help you internalize the logic in a way because you're feeling emotional. And this is one of the things that when writers do this, it's so helpful. It's really get outside themselves and look at their writing the way a reader would look at it. And that's the reason it's sometimes good to put things away and then come back and read them again. Because like sometimes I'll look at things that I haven't, something I've written, and then I haven't read it for a while, and I'll come back and read it again. I'll be like, oh, did I write that? Like, that's interesting, because I don't, I'm now looking at it as a reader. And so the more you can do that with your own writing, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, the majority of the time I try to walk away for at least an hour.
Yep.
Like the post that the thing that I wrote today, the post on the pre-call for Thursday night. I wrote it. I drove to my appointment. Figuring that'll give me 90 minutes. I can come back and look at it one more time.
Yep. That's a really good thing to do. So a hint I saw on Twitter the other day was if you're having trouble like looking at your own work, sometimes just making it in a different font and a different type size will help you look at it in a new way, and it's a really good way to help you get errors or help edit it, because sometimes when you're reading something you've written, your mind just skips ahead because you know what you've written. But if you change the size and the font, then you're literally looking at it with new eyes again.
Never heard that tip before, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was. Well, I remembered when I was proofing, I used to proof things like that had to go. I owned an ad agency, so I had to proof things. And I found that if I made a PDF of it, I'd always find things that I hadn't found before. But I think it's exactly the same thing. Like just by making a PDF, you're making the font like bigger or in a different format, and so your eyes are seeing it differently. Your eyes are actually seeing it differently. So yeah, I think that's a great.
Yeah, and probably putting it in a PDF also. And you're like, oh, wait, this can't go here, this can't go here.
That's a really good point, too. But even with, that's kind of why I like loading my own posts into WordPress. And so what I'll do is a lot of times I write my posts on a blank email, because I'm always emailing people. I'm always practicing my writing on a blank email. So I'll write a post on a blank email, and then I'll put it into WordPress, and then I'll go through and edit it in there. And it's the same thing. Like WordPress automatically changes the font, makes it a slightly different size. So it's easier to make changes because now it's in a different format. But I just never I had never made that connection before. So that's interesting.
And neither had I. And I write them in Word doc, and then transfer them over. But yeah, it's the same idea.
Yeah, exactly. David, do you have any questions or comments or things that, specific? It doesn't have to be about what we talked about. It can be really about anything that you're wondering about.
Oh, just sorry, the call dropped, so I called back in. Yeah, as far as kind of getting back to that question of, my relationship with words, I've always sort of felt like I sort of look at words as dynamic, sort of really what you've been talking about in the sense that, I look at words as a way for me to sort of express what my meaning is. But at the same time, I'm really conscious about how the reader's going to read it. So, I may change a specific word like 2 or 3 times. And then what I also kind of noticed there is that if I do that, sometimes the sentence or the sentences around it have to change just to kind of support, what I want that sentence to say. So I think through that sort of context, my writing's gone from very tentative to very, explicit, to sometimes emotional and sometimes very logical. So I guess kind of really depending on who the audience is. I think, I like the discussion around, emotion and sort of incorporating that into writing, what that kind of looks like, because I think I've been very, very logical in my approach a lot, because I was going to a PhD program, so everything was very logical and to the point and somewhat dry. But there are those moments, probably specific posts that maybe touch on emotions or emotional issues that sometimes I've had some struggle with. But I've had to literally sit down and try to pull emotions out of me so I can actually kind of write in a different way. I think that's something I do like to do, because I usually when I do write something, I usually do it in story form, as far as kind of personal experiences and sort of applying whatever subject or whatever, particular issue I'm talking about at that time. And I've found that to be helpful, as opposed to just writing straight about a particular issue, from an external sort of, point of view. So I think right now I am looking more at my relationship with writing and words, as I'm kind of going forward with my blog posts and things like that. And also kind of touching on what you've, just talked about in terms of looking at your writing in a different way. I find that to be very, very true, because I've recently looked at some book reviews that I did back in 2011, and I read them, and I was like, wow, I wrote that. It's because they just sounded good. They were pretty. I thought they were pretty good, but based on who I am now and kind of how I write now, it just seemed completely foreign. And sometimes I have that same reaction to stuff that I'm writing at the moment that I haven't seen in maybe a week. So, I think right now as a writer, I'm kind of emerging and kind of learning, who I am as far as my own identity as a writer. So I think all these things that you've been talking about, are going to be really, really helpful as I kind of dive further into it. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Great, thanks. Well, I love the word dynamic, because I hadn't really thought about that either. Like the idea that word choice doesn't just change the sentence that you're working on, but it changes the surrounding sentences. I'm not sure I had ever really thought about it that way before. So I think that's a great insight. One of the things I like to tell writers is that you can take the parts, if you really want to make your writing stronger, if you're really devoted to the craft of making your writing better, one thing you can do is take the different parts of speech and examine your patterns for those. In writing classes, pretty standard exercise is to go through and look at all your verbs and see if your verbs are actually active verbs or if they're just being verbs, passive verbs, is verbs. So if your sentences are always like, she is sitting on the chair, change it to she sits. You know what I mean? Like even the sitting can be more active when you take out the is. But even more than that, like is there a stronger verb you can use than the one that you're using? Do you use other words to describe the action besides the verbs, and can you just change it to a stronger verb? You know, she walked briskly to the store, or she jogged to the store. Then you're making a little stronger verb and getting rid of the adverb. One thing that I had tended to do that I noticed about myself was that when I used to get stressed out, like if I was writing and I was stressed out, I would forget to put pronouns in because it was almost like the stress was causing me to dissociate a little bit from people. Like, remember I said, you know, I used to be really afraid of people. I used to use words as an escape. Well, that fear would come across in my writing by not naming people, by not having them not having it be clear who people were. So I would just use lots of pronouns like him and her and it and they instead of like naming people like Bill or the tall guy or the man in the blue sweater or whatever it is, like something that would make them into real people. And once I realized that, so now I just go through and do a pronoun check. I know that about myself. I sometimes do pronouns that aren't specific enough. So I literally go through and do a pronoun check and make sure it's clear who I'm talking about. So knowing the parts of speech and knowing where your weaknesses are with those parts of speech is like that gets into the minutia of your craft of what you can do to actually make your writing better. Any other questions? Thoughts, comments?
So I have one. So as far as like the reader and to the point where it's sort of like hooks them as far as like your style or sort of like getting them interested in just your message. Like what sort of tips or advice do you have for someone who's just starting out, like doing blog posts or writing articles?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think the main thing and the place where new writers often fail is just not having a real clear idea of what their post is about and what the goal of it is. So, they might be telling a story, or they might want to write about something because they're really emotional, or they might decide to do this how-to of sort of random tips, but they don't have an overall, here's what I actually want to accomplish with this post, and have a clear sense of what they want to accomplish that keeps the post being about that one thing. And so I think if you can step back from your writing, and I haven't read any, this isn't obviously personally about you or your writing, it's just in general. But if you can step back and say, okay, what do I really want to accomplish here? What is it that I want somebody to know this one thing, or if I want somebody to really be able to find 10 new dates to go on, or do I want to really explain what's going on, things that they haven't seen before, or do I want to maybe I do just want to tell a story, but I want it to be such a great story that they walk away going, wow, that was an amazing story. And I think some people don't really start with that purpose in mind. So I think that's the biggest thing. The other thing I would say is think really carefully about your title and your subhead, because those will make the difference in framing the story in the reader's mind in a way that engages them. And so what you want to do is you want to make a promise to the reader, and then you want to keep that promise. So in your headline and your subhead, you're making a promise to the reader. You're saying anything from, how to cook a lamb chop. I don't know what it is. And then if that's your title, you better tell the reader how to actually cook a lamb chop in a way that they have never cooked a lamb chop before. So whatever the promise is that you're making in the title and the subhead, deliver on that promise. And that alone will really hook the reader. That really is the hook right there, making a promise and then keeping it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay, good. That's something else I learned in screenwriting. In screenwriting, every scene has its own emotional arc. So every scene, somebody walks into a scene mad and then leaves it with some other emotion. I mean, they don't walk into every scene mad. They walk into a scene with one emotion and then leave with a different emotion. But that every scene also makes a promise to a reader and then delivers on that, either in that scene or further down the road. So if it's that old quote by Chekhov, right? He said, if you have a gun hanging over a mantle in Act 1, that gun better go off by Act 3. So the idea is that whatever you're introducing into your story has to pay off in some way. It has to be important later on. And if it's not important, then get rid of it and use it for some other blog post. But the really well-crafted posts are ones that are that's what they mean by your writing being tight. It's when everything has a certain level of importance and is there for a very specific reason.
Okay. Very helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, I know JR had to leave early to go.
Okay. I have another question for you.
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
Okay. I wasn't sure if JR was still on the phone. In terms of, again, blog posts or articles, I feel that a certain level of the writer should be present, obviously within within a submission. Is there such a thing as too much of, let's say, the writer's personality in there, sort of meaning like maybe the content gets lost?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that could certainly happen. An example that comes to mind is sometimes people will try to be clever.
Yeah.
Like they want to show off how clever they are, and then it just gets to be distracting. Sometimes people will want to show off how smart they are. So it's funny, I keep using this word show off. It's almost as if the writer wants the reader to see this aspect of their personality. So the drive to have that be seen overtakes the message itself. And I think that's where it's a liability instead of an asset. You know what I mean? That's where it gets in the way. It's when the writer wants the reader to see how clever they are, or they want to see how smart they are, or they want to see how funny they are. And so instead of just being funny or being smart or being clever, it comes across as, oh, I really want the reader to weaving a little cleverness into their story where it's appropriate.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I asked that just because I tend to inject a little humor. I mean, usually I sort of inject jokes into a lot of things, but usually I use a bit of restraint as far as when I write something, just because I don't want to sort of like overtake everything. So I just wasn't sure if that's sort of like a good idea, or if it just should be more of an organic thing where you just kind of are write how you write, or if you just do that and edit later. So that's kind of where that question was coming from.
Yeah, I'm of the write how you write and edit later.
All right.
Group, but there are other people who aren't. You know what I mean? Like that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's how I tend to be. I like to not hold back and sort of lay it all out and get the emotion there, get the humor there, get the whatever there, and then just go back and make sure that it's not coming across in a way that I didn't intend. So that's when I step out of myself. So first I'll write it as me, the writer, and then I'll try to step out of myself and read it as me, the reader, who's not me, and see if it's coming across as I intended.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say it's difficult to do, and I don't always do it perfectly, but that's my ideal strategy.
Right. Well, no, I mean, I know just from the columnist training that I did online, and I think also a bit in the right, like an editor training. The tip about reading it out loud, sort of like how I meant it in my voice, is helpful, just because I think there have been a moment or two where I was kind of like, okay, that's a little bit too much, so I'll reel it in. So that is helpful, and I tell, because I teach composition also, so like I teach my students the same thing, where it's kind of like, when you're writing, you're so in your headspace and everything makes sense, even though there may be like a ton of errors in it. It looks completely normal to you, but then read it out loud and see how it actually flows. yeah, it's that process has actually been very helpful. So yeah, I'll probably go more towards writing more organically, and then just kind of relying on editing later to sort of, as you say, tightening it up. So that's helpful advice.
Good. Yeah, humor. I actually wanted to do a whole call on humor at one point. I love humor, and I've taken like stand-up comedy classes. I've performed stand-up comedy. I've taken improv classes. I've learned how to write jokes. I've done all of that, but not because I necessarily want to be funny. I just want to be able to incorporate humor into everything I do in a natural way,
Yeah. So another question.
Yes.
So obviously, since one of the things I tell my students is be very aware of who your audience is, because usually since your writing is very contingent, so it's depending on who's reading it or the population you're gearing a piece towards, that's obviously going to impact word choice. It's going to impact how you deliver stuff. It would even impact how much humor you use or what kind of humor you use. But I think if you're sort of using an online platform where multiple people from multiple populations and different backgrounds and diversities and things like that could potentially be reading your post, because mine's really kind of focused on sort of aging, middle age and things like that. That could encompass just a wide variety of people from just with different demographics. So what would your advice be in terms of being able to cast a wide net and appeal to different readers from different backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we do have a really diverse. We really do have a diverse audience. So I would think about when you're using examples, can you think of examples that might be with a diverse amount of people? Maybe even though you're talking about aging, you talked to somebody really young about it and got their take on it, or unexpected people that gave you unexpected insights, so you can weave those into what you're writing about and make it feel more diverse. Maybe it's putting in little facts about how other countries deal with aging. Maybe it's I guess the thing would be to just continue to challenge yourself to think of it more broadly, which I think will just make what you're writing about more interesting overall, especially if you plan to write about this topic over time. Another point that another writer made was, and I don't know whether this applies to you or not, but I'll just throw it out there because I found it really helpful. So we had this writer who writes about sex, love, and relationships, and he was so prolific, and his posts would always get millions of page views, literally millions of page views. And we're like, how does he get millions of page views all of the time? And he said that he actually had a very specific way of how he decided what to write about. So what he did was he took the life cycle of a relationship. So he said, okay, from meeting someone to dating them to courting them, to making a decision about whether to marry or move in or have a long-term relationship, to how do you keep passion alive in a long-term relationship, to how do you break up, to how do you deal with death or grief or, some other loss of the relationship. So he had the entire spectrum of the relationship laid out in his mind. And then he would write posts about each phase. And so he wouldn't try to connect with everyone, like, people who were breaking up have different needs in a post than people who are in long-term relationships who want to spark it up. But what he found was he'd always get people who, like, when he wrote about breaking up, he'd get people who would write to him and say, "Oh my God, I just saw your post on breakups. How did you know I was just going through a breakup?" Well, of course he didn't. He was just writing because he knew that a lot of people are going through breakups. But it was the same thing, like, "Oh my God, I'm just starting to date and I had no idea where to take my date to, and your top 10 tips for places to go on interesting first dates was just what I needed." And so it was just an interesting way to think. I like, just understanding that, like, hitting people at the different stages in whatever it is you're writing about is going to connect with some of the target audience in ways that make it feel like you're talking just to them.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I'll use that.
yeah, I thought that was, like, really helpful.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. Those are the three major ones burning in my mind.
Great. Well, thanks for joining. We're close to out of time anyway, so hope you'll come back. We're going to try and get more people on these calls. They're more fun when there's lots of people, but when there's only a couple, then you get all your questions answered.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you, David. Great talking to you. Hope to talk to you soon, and I'll be looking out for your writing.
All right, definitely. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye.